So first of all, let me invite Egemen Bağış, former Minister for European Affairs, Government of Turkey. Please join me on the stage. And if I can ask our speakers to take their seats from here and to the right. Welcome, sir. We're going to be joined online by Dimitris Avramopoulos, who is the former European Commissioner for Migration, Home Affairs and Citizenship, and a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Government of Greece. Do we have Dimitri online? Hopefully we do. In the room, we also have General Sir Patrick Sanders, former Chief of the General Staff, Britain, Chairman of Herminius Strategic Intelligence. Welcome, sir. Welcome, General. We have Tomi Huhtanen, Executive Director of the Wilfried Martens Centre for European Studies. Welcome, Tomi. And finally, Othon Anastasakis, Director of the European Studies Centre and Southeast European Studies at the University of Oxford. Okay, let's not waste any time. All our speakers are going to make some opening remarks. I would entreat you to try and keep those brief, even less than the 5 minutes that you've been told you can have, because that would allow us to have a bit of some Q&A afterwards before the coffee break. So, over to you, Mr. Bağış.
Well, thank you very much. Let me begin by expressing my appreciation to the organizers for bringing us together. I believe we're meeting in this beautiful city at a very sensitive period when Europe is facing some very critical tests. As discussed here, we have many issues that we need to deal with. The geopolitical landscape is shifting in an unprecedented speed, and the question before us is no longer whether Europe should act together, but how cohesive, resolute, and forward-looking we can be. This is especially true for Southeast Europe. And today, the Southeast Europe stands as a buffer in front of many challenges. To meet these challenges, we must deepen cooperation within European Union, NATO, and among all partners committed to stability and democratic values. So we must modernize our defense capabilities, invest in our innovation, strengthen mechanisms that allow us to act together. Especially, we must reinforce trust between states, institutions, and our citizens. Cohesion is built not only through policies, but through shared purpose. The recent crises have exposed Europe's vulnerabilities. The war in Ukraine revealed Europe's dependence on Russian energy and gaps in its defense industry. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed fragilities in supply chains and coordination. The ongoing tragedy, genocide in Gaza, has revealed deep moral divisions in foreign policy, while global dynamics continue to generate uncertainties, refugee movements, and security pressures. These realities underscore the urgent need for a renewed vision of European security, one that bridges the gap between EU and non-EU partners and redefines Europe's place in the transatlantic alliance. Europe cannot afford to be divided abroad while it remains uncertain at home. Turkey welcomes the EU's ambition to become a more capable and strategic actor in security and defense. We stand ready to contribute as a NATO ally, as a strategic partner, and as a future member of European Union. Our defense industry today is strong, competitive, and innovative. Turkey has NATO's second largest army and is ranked 9th globally in 2025. 5 of the world's top 100 defense companies are Turkish. Defense exports of Turkey surpassed 8 billion last year and will likely exceed 10 billion this year. 2 decades ago, we used to import 80% of our military needs. Today, it's down to 15%. Turkey is among the only 5 nations capable of producing the next generation fighter jet, from the Altay tank to Baykar, to Milgem frigates, to Anka and TB2 drones and Kaan fighter jet. These platforms are not only Turkish assets, they are potential European assets if Europe wants us. This is why Turkey's participation in SAFE, the Security Action for Alliance initiative, is not optional, it's essential. With a defense industry as capable as ours, Europe would lose a critical advantage by neglecting Turkey's contribution. So excluding Turkey weakens Europe's defense ecosystem and undermines its own autonomy. History has shown that Turkey has often stood as Europe's first line of defense. A Europe that sidelines Turkey is a Europe that sidelines its own security and future. Our partnership extends beyond security. We are EU's 5th largest trading partner, and EU remains Turkey's largest. We secure the supply chains, strengthen critical industries, and serve as a vital energy corridor connecting Europe with global resources. Imagine the enhanced cooperation between Port of Rijeka and Mersin would not only contribute to Turkey and Croatia and to Europe, but it would connect all continents. So there's huge potential for our cooperation, and I think we have to focus on what we can do together. I'll stop there and we will continue with the questions because I want to give a chance to others to debate.
Perfect, thank you very much. And yes, you saved us some seconds, vital seconds there. Do we have Mr. Avramopoulos online?
Kalimera to all of you, good morning. Believe me, I'm not the happiest man. I would like to be there in this beautiful city, surrounded by persons and personalities that I respect, and I would like to share some thoughts with them. You know, the title of this panel is Building a Stronger and More Cohesive Europe, which means that strength is not built and cohesion does not exist. Otherwise, we wouldn't raise this question. Anyway, how can we build a stronger, more cohesive, and more strategically mature Europe in a rapidly changing geopolitical environment, changing every day? We all understand and recognize that the landscape around us, east, south, and across the Mediterranean, is undergoing profound transformation. The certainties of the past, as we were used to experience it, are no longer guaranteed. Europe must therefore adapt with clarity, realism, and most importantly, and unity. The conflict in Ukraine, again, referred to that before, has reminded us of the fragility of peace on our continent. You know, we all around this table are the privileged, represent the privileged generation that we have never lived a war. And we take it for granted. Nobody would have imagined some years ago that we would be confronted with all these challenges. As you know, coming back to Ukraine, the latest discussions in Moscow on the revised United States peace proposal, which again ended without agreement and revealed deep divergences on territorial issues and security guarantees, show how difficult the path to a just settlement remains. Europe must therefore remain firmly committed to stability, to diplomacy, and to a rules-based international order. This is why any sustainable solution must ensure long-term security for Ukraine, while at the same time creating the conditions for a future regional equilibrium. Europe's role is not only to support, but also to contribute to shaping a stable security architecture for the whole continent when the time comes. Our focus today is the southeast of Europe, a region of vital strategic importance. It is not Europe's periphery in some belief, it is Europe's gateway. From the Black Sea to the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans, this region concentrates the challenges and opportunities that we will define Europe in the years ahead. Energy security and diversification, maritime stability, connectivity and infrastructure corridors, migration pressures. I have lived it, I have experienced it firsthand, because as you know, 5 months after my arrival, after I was designated European Commissioner for Migration and Security, we had the very first uncontrolled migratory flows and the very first terrorist attacks. So I was the lucky one to be asked to set up from scratch the European agenda on migration and security. Believe me, it was not an easy thing. To convince 28 at that time member states to talk to each other, and as it was said before, to trust each other, it was the most difficult task of my life. It worked. We gave some results. But is the problem resolved? Not yet. And it will remain here for many years ahead. And I believe that neither Europe nor the whole world, the global community, international community, is ready to address it. Anyway, we have to cope with that. I have often stressed that Europe's resilience begins at its external borders. And no part of our union illustrates this more clearly than the southeast. Our friends from Cyprus, from Italy, from Turkey, feel it every day. The frontline states here carry, believe me, responsibilities that ultimately safeguard the entire European project. But this also highlights what we must strengthen. First, Europe needs a broader strategic vision. Does not exist. A union that understands its neighborhood, anticipates developments, and can act collectively, not by replacing existing security frameworks, but by complementing them, bringing European cohesion, planning, and responsibility to the forefront. Second, Europe must invest in connectivity. Energy routes from the Caspian, the Eastern Mediterranean, and North Africa, digital corridors linking continents, logistics networks, and that anchor Europe in global trade. Now, the Southeast is at the heart of all these emerging infrastructures, because what happens here will determine Europe's energy autonomy and competitiveness. Third, Europe must maintain cohesion and solidarity. Solidarity was put at stake during the 3 successive crises. Frontline states, whether facing migration flows, energy pressures, or maritime risk, cannot be left alone, but is their real, let's say, need of solidarity to the southern parts of Europe? No. From my own experience, I can tell you that the northern European countries, they do not see, understand, and feel the same all these challenges of the south. Now, cohesion. Cohesion is not a matter of fairness. It is a matter of strategic necessity. A Europe that shares burdens in a Europe that can shape its future. Burden sharing, big problem. Are they all ready to share it? No. Above all, we need political leadership. Leadership that sees beyond the current crisis, that builds bridges rather than walls, and that understands that Europe's strength comes from unity, predictability, and constructive engagement with all partners in its wider neighborhood, including those with whom relations may sometimes be complex. Today's discussion is very important, but it's also an opportunity to look beyond the immediate challenges and focus on the Europe we want to build. A Europe confident in its values. I don't think it exists today. You see, the rise of all these populist and anti-European forces put the European project at stake. And believe me, if we continue like this, we shall revert to the dark pages of our recent history. Well, the cohesive Europe is a safer Europe. A connected Europe is a more competitive Europe. And the strategically mature Europe is a more influential Europe around the world. Believe me, the voice of Europe is not heard anymore. All these crises around Europe, because Europe is at the epicenter of an arc of instability that starts from Tunisia and goes up to Ukraine. And Europe's voice is not heard. Final remark. If Europe does not decide, and this is the responsibility both of the European and the national leaderships, to complete the European project by adopting a common defense and foreign policy, the European ideal and the European project will be at stake. This is a huge responsibility, of today's leadership at the European, as I said before, and at the national level. Let's hope that reason will prevail, that we shall go back to the dream and the vision of our forefathers. Otherwise, we shall revert to the past. And this is very, very dangerous for us, and especially for the younger generations.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Dimitri. We'll move on to our next speaker, General Sir Patrick Sanders.
Thanks, Joan. So I'm speaking as a soldier, clearly, but I'm also speaking for someone who advises one of Europe's largest defense firms, a drone firm, and I'm speaking as a banker because I'm now Santander's global defense advisor, and Santander has the aspiration, the intention to become Europe's largest defense bank, and the capital is necessary. It's a pleasure to be back in this region. I spent much of my early service serving in the Balkans, and for those of us who lived through that experience, it's impossible to forget the horror and the suffering that people in this part of the world went through. And yet we have forgotten. It's the point that Dimitri was making. We've forgotten that in human history, peace is a brief interlude between wars. We've forgotten that wars are long. By historical standards, the First World War, the Second World War, and this Ukrainian war are short wars. It is not enough to have defense capability for the first 3 weeks, or to indulge in a fallacy that wars are short. They're not, they're long. We've forgotten that wars are frequent. In the millennia between 900 and 1900, Russia only has 25 years of uninterrupted peace, and if you're English, 56 out of every 100 years, you're at war. We've forgotten that wars spread, that they metastasize. We've forgotten that wars are unbelievably destructive. 1.3 million casualties the Russians have taken. That's more than the US did in the Second World War. And we've forgotten that wars are costly. So in the UK, in 1937, we're spending 2.9% of GDP on defense. By 1940, it's 10%. By 1945, it's 50%. We should not be worrying about investing in deterrence to prevent wars, because it's a lot cheaper than waging a war. So let's recognize the threat for what it is. Yes, there is a hybrid threat, everything, everywhere, all at once, but predominantly we're facing an imperial, expansionist, aggressive power in Europe, and Putin's aims are not just to subjugate Ukraine and reduce it to a vassal state, but his aims are also to extend the borders and the influence of Russia, to restore Catherine the Great's Russia, and his intentions are to dismantle the European security architecture. And so, after Ukraine, these will be his next points of focus. And if we are not in a position to deter by denial and not through punishment, and that means having relevant capabilities ready and at the point of need, then we will suffer a fate where NATO falls apart, and the world will be much more like Yalta than it will be like Helsinki. So what is to be done to channel Lenin? Well, first of all, Europe has to recognize that being a one-dimensional superpower no longer stacks up in a world where hard power is what counts. It's no use being a regulatory superpower or a financial superpower if you don't have hard power and tech power. Secondly, we have to recognize that Ukraine is the fulcrum between a Yalta world and a Helsinki world. And so we have no choice but to enable Russian defeat. And it is possible. It is absolutely possible to deny Putin his objectives, because that's what defeat means. Because if we don't, the consequences are appalling. And we do that by imposing cost and by supporting Ukraine in a way you heard from Dmitry Kuleba earlier on. And the acid test of our will are the frozen assets that are being debated coming up next year. And then thirdly, from a European perspective, we have to rearm. And to do that, we need to get after deregulation. Not simplification, because simplification assumes that the regulations are necessary in the first place. We have to deregulate so that we move from a market which is fragmented to one that is consolidated. We promote integration, we create scale, we mobilize capital, and critically, we secure our supply chains. Because China has an absolute veto on European rearmament, since it controls 90% of the rare earth minerals that will be at the frontier technologies that we need to rearm. And that is going to be a 10-year project to overcome. Secondly, we have to invest in relevant sovereign capabilities. But more important than that, we need a procurement system that operates and matches the pace of innovation and adaptation, and not one that is fitted for 10-year, 15-year, 20-year programs. And finally, we need to consider the nuclear question, because extended deterrence is not going away, or is no longer something we can take for granted. So if I bring this to a close, I'm a great fan of history. Ibn Khaldun reminds us that prosperous nations there's 4 signs of decline in a prosperous nation is when you have excessive bureaucracy, you have excessive taxation, you spend beyond your means, and you use your military edge. Europe is falling into that trap, but we have agency and we can turn it around.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a while since I heard Gibbon quoted on stage, but that's nice. Over to you, Tomi Huhtanen.
Thank you, Joan, and it's first of all great pleasure to be here. I think it's my 3rd conference. Thank you for the Economist. I feel that every time, you know, it's more friends and we become more like a community. Also, I'm impressed about Joan. You know, he's pushing this through whole day as a moderator, and as you many do the job, it's not easy. So it's really pleasure to be here. I find myself, after General Sanders, basically saying the same thing, but a little bit on the more political angle. I think really the key point, when we speak about stronger Europe and, you know, even its cohesion, the main point is that Europe is not sovereign. If it's not sovereign, it's in defense, in security. You know, we have clear examples. Just looked at the latest trade negotiations where, you know, Europe's position was very much, I would claim, you know, impacted of the security situation, the situation in Ukraine. One thing, because a lot of this discussion is done in the European level. For example, you know, this discussion of SAVE, 150 billion, and you know, this tool or fund where you can loan money. And I think it's a good step to the good direction. But the issue is that it's actually the Prime Minister Plenković, if you listen to him, he made actually the story which is in many European countries. That after the Berlin Wall, you have a situation where you know, it was considered that the security threats are different, and in many places, you know, the defense structures were taken down, no conscription model, and now we are in the situation that most of the European countries are not able to defend their territory, with the assumption that there is no real threat, or with the assumption that NATO and US will come to help. In a European level, many issues can be done. First of all, we have to think about the concept. As General Sanders mentioned, we have to have kind of level playing procurement tools, single market for defense. We need military mobility so that we can move, even that we have not yet handled, move troops from west to east if needed. We can do a lot of common research in a European level, in civil protection, and in many other areas. But the main issue is really what the individual member states do and how they defend. Also, when we speak about European security and defense, there is one issue, and we discussed with Professor Anastasakis when we were driving with the taxi here in a hotel where the best discussions always take place, and making the point that we have now the political problem. And so I'm from Finland, so if the tanks come in 2 hours, stay in my mother's front door. So I have a piece in the game. But the political reality is that we have to, in that discussion, start to see more the regional challenges. For example, Greeks are with the Turks. We have the Cypriots, which have their concerns. You have the south, for example, Malta with Libya. We have even Spain, you know, who have thought they have concerns about Morocco, Ceuta, Melilla. All these discussions, because the people and the citizens after 3-4 years start to say that, wait, okay, we understand this Ukraine, etc. But how about our concerns? That's one of the challenges. And to conclude, I would say 3 taboos which we need to, in my view, need to integrate this discussion. First is the nuclear deterrence. It's the big elephant in the room, which we don't dare to touch. This understanding that is one aspect we need to tackle. Maybe UK can be very helpful, but that discussion needs to take place. The second is and we discussed with General Sanders yesterday evening, is this the fact that the mobilization capacity. This week we heard news about France. There's discussion in Germany and Poland coming, relaunching the drafting. And third impact, which was again mentioned by General, is I think there is no understanding or not enough understanding how crucial Ukraine is for European security and defense architecture for the future, for us. Because they are the real military superpower in Europe for us. And to conclude, and this I know many people are not so happy when I say that, but it's not for granted. If we fail them, you know, in 3 to 4 years, it's not so sure that they definitely are on our side. It is, you know, in the moment there will be ceasefire, there will be a new political situation in Ukraine, and the Russians will be there. You know, and we can, in a worst case scenario, have a kind of Georgia type of situation in Ukraine. I'm saying it openly. So with this, pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Othon, over to you.
Thank you very much, John, and it's great to be here in this excellent discussion. Now, I will be focusing on the Western Balkans and how that region fits into the overall security architecture of Europe. My main point is that what we are seeing is that this region is not anymore the consumers of defense industry, but they are actually becoming contributors to the overall European architecture. That's really important in this new environment that we are seeing building in Europe. Obviously, in the European Union in general, and all the European countries, we do see a sense of a collective security, more defense spending, new military arrangements, new institutions, but also a more geopolitical European Union, which is particularly important in terms of the nature of the beast. What about the Balkan challenge? The region is very important in this European architecture because, to begin with, it is at the crossroads between Central Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean, but also Black Sea and the Adriatic, so a very important geostrategic position, but at the same time, it is also vulnerable, because it's not part of the European Union, to a lot of external influences, specifically coming from Russia and China. What we are seeing in terms of how the region is responding to these new security dimensions and threats, especially after Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine, we are seeing defense spending that has been on the increase among all the countries. Indeed, all of them are over 2% of their GDP, not the goal that the United States have set for NATO countries, but still ahead of many other European states. A lot of this spending goes to equipment and modernization of their defense capability. There is increased procurement from European countries, so there is a European dimension to this. A lot of military drills that are happening in the region, and also new alliances as well that are being built. For instance, we have seen Croatia, Albania, and Kosovo in this joint defense cooperation declaration. We are also seeing not just procurement from Europe, but also we are seeing local industry as well that is also being updated and it's being developed. At the same time, we've seen from all the countries, including Serbia, that is the more kind of wavering between Russia and Europe, we have seen solidarity towards Ukraine, which is a very good thing. So this is a lot of input there, but let's see a little bit the risks in the Western Balkans as well from this defense increase. First of all, there's a divergent NATO associations in the sense that we have some countries that are members and some countries that are aspirants and some of them that are not members of NATO. That already creates a sort of divergence between and variance between these countries. There is also defense cooperation, not at a regional level. Not all countries are in the same kind of pathway, but there are bilateral or trilateral or ad hoc, not always so coordinated. At the same time, there is still the mistrust from the 1990s. Still there are bilateral problems. So that trilateral declaration, for instance, that I was talking about, was not received very positively from Serbia. So there are those kinds of kind of unease. Kosovo's drone programs as well are not seen very nicely from Belgrade. And there is a competition even in terms of Serbia and Hungary. Defense cooperation comes a little bit in an antagonistic kind of way. Also, another risk in this defense environment is how local actors are responding to this increase in spending, in the sense that we all know that defense spending is a top-down issue, and the region still needs to do much more in terms of rule of law, corruption, organized crime, and how you deal with defense issues in particular is a very big challenge. But my main point in the end is how this geopolitical European Union is actually going hand to hand with this more normative Europe. So how can the EU, and that's the biggest challenge for the European Union, by the way, how the EU will build better democracies in the region at the same time as having those geopolitical priorities. Because as we know, sometimes the European Union has to cut some corners for the sake of stability. So that is a big kind of challenge for the European Union, and the big challenge for the region and the EU is how to bring the whole of the region into a kind of a common regional path in the defense industry.
Thank you very much, Othon. Okay, we run over time. Don't want to take too much from the coffee break, but I'll take some. So that means we've probably got about 8 minutes for discussion. So maybe just to focus on 2 questions. Well, we're in this region, so I think first of all we should focus on the left outs, if you like, and that's the Western Balkan countries, Turkey, and left outs in other ways, also left out of this SAFE program, UK and Turkey, not really included in that in any kind of full way. So I guess the question is, is the EU, if we're looking for in this new context and the idea of a more geopolitical EU, is the EU not shooting itself in the foot by actually not doing more to integrate these countries, which are in the front line, which have a contribution to make, which actually, if we're talking about Western Balkans, are not going to cost too much. They're small. Okay, they're going to be net recipients, but they're pretty small compared with others who've joined in previous waves. And the effect of the kind of disengagement over many years is that people have become cynical. They don't believe anymore that it's going to happen, and so reforms come to a standstill. So it's a kind of two-way relationship there. It takes 2 to tango, if you like. So who wants to talk about that? Because if the Western Balkans aren't going to join, when is Ukraine going to join? When can Turkey join? So what's a realistic plan?
John, very shortly, just to what Professor said. For example, Western Balkans, as you, John, mentioned, the logic would be for geopolitical reasons, looking what is happening, we should take them in as quickly as possible. But the challenge with European Union is that it's a democracy, and the citizens' opinion matters. Martens Centre, what we did a couple of years ago, and I think it's still very valid, we made a polling about citizens about enlargement. So first of all, the 3 short conclusions. First of all, people want to be informed about those countries, and they want to be involved in decision making. And third, it was very clear that we cannot do any more about this kind of big political, like 20 years ago, for political reasons, because people have experience on enlargement, so it needs to be merit-based process. So that's very clear. The economic factors and conditions matters. So that already said certain. So how one can see the enlargement, it really demands the progress from the countries itself. That is the condition which we cannot bypass for political reasons.
Okay, fair point. Mr. Bağış, I wanted to bring in you on Turkey. I mean, it seems to me it's unrealistic to expect that Turkey is going to be, after what the recent history, that it's going to be joining. But the question is, what does Turkey want from the EU? Obviously, more serious engagement. You outlined what Turkey has to offer to a more geopolitical EU in terms of defense capability and other things, many other things. But what is it that you would want to see? And what do you see as feasible, realistic, actually, for Turkey?
Let me be very frank. the accession process is not a technical one, it's a political one.
Sure.
We all know millions of Eastern Germans became full and equal members of European Union overnight without going through any negotiation or chapters or this or that, because politically that was needed. Now we're approaching a period where politically Europe really needs to wake up. Today, Europe needs Turkey a lot more than Turkey needs Europe. We have alternatives. Europe has to think, how many alternatives do they have? Realistically, looking at the globe, looking at the developments and map. So no one should expect Turkey to carry Europe's burdens while denying her a seat at the table. If we are asked to contribute, then we have to be a part of the decision-making process. Now, European Union has candidate countries, negotiating countries, and member countries. Maybe it's time to ask the question of creating different membership types. And that might somehow comfort some of the existing members. But realistically, without UK, without Turkey, without Switzerland, without Norway, many European projects could be endangered. So Europe has to understand, we are not Europe's neighbor. Turkey is Europe and part of her future. And we are willing to contribute, but it takes two to tango.
Yeah. I don't know if Dimitri is still on the line, but he might want to say something on this. He may have had to go because we're running over, but just to give the opportunity to come in.
I'll be very short. First of all, I had worked on this, on the enlargement as European Commissioner, and I have been in all countries in the region in order to see on the ground how all these reforms are taking place. Because it is true to say that the European Union has put some benchmarks on all these countries aspire to become members of the European Union, including Turkey. Starting from Turkey, I can tell you that during my tenure, Turkey had made a great progress in meeting all benchmarks in order to acquire, to be granted visa waiver, which would be a very first step. Approximately, and Egemen can correct me if I'm wrong, 87% of these benchmarks had been met. Everything stopped for other reasons, geopolitical and political. The same is with the other countries in the wider region of the Balkans. All these countries are aspired to become members, and believe me, I was always a proponent and advocating for that. They have also to make progress in certain areas, rule of law, democratic function of the system, and of course, to stop the expansion of nationalism in the Balkans. I remind you that the term Balkanization in the diplomatic vocabulary means revert to ethnic, religious rivalries, and the world has suffered from the nationalism in this area. Nowadays, with what's happening in Europe, there is a lot of skepticism, even between these countries, whether they should join or not the European Union. So we have to see the larger picture. First of all, the question, does Europe need the so-called Western Balkans between us? I don't know who named them Western Balkans. I mean, it's a very vague, let's say, definition. But beyond that, it's true to say that Balkans were always part of Europe. The same is with Turkey. I'll tell you, Turkey, if you take
Very
a look
quickly,
back
Dimitri,
in its
just
history,
'cause we're
it was
short of
always
time.
looking towards Europe at that time, historically speaking. But they have to do all the great efforts. Regarding Turkey now, Turkey has made a great progress, no doubt about it. And it's a big country. It became even bigger during our days. But they have also to respond to some specific pending issues in the region. I come back to what I always say. It is in the benefit of Turkey to proceed the solution of the Cyprus issue. It's a pending issue, and the Europeans are very sensitive on that, not only Greece, but also the Europeans. And on the other hand, in the Balkans, corruption has to be fought in a very, very radical way. Whether we want to admit it or not, most of the countries in the region are confronted with this question. So the answer is yes, they have to find the door open, but they have to fulfill and complete their homework in order to be ready to to step to cross the threshold of the European Union. Europe needs all these countries in order to become more complete. And it will take some time, but let's hope that at the end, this is what will prevail.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. So, God, we're really out of time, but I just wanted to come back to the question of a sovereign Europe and agency, the issue that you raised, General Sanders. So you emphasize that really, that the importance of assuming responsibility, taking control, agency, that it can be done. Obviously, it's easier for a nation state to do that. It's not so easy for a bloc of more than 24 member states to do it. So what is stopping Europe from moving in this direction? Just to give an opportunity to you to come back on that yourself, or Tomi or Othon, just some very quick points just to bring us into the coffee break. Literally a minute.
I was going to say, how long have we got? Because that's a question that you can't answer
very
in
we
what
can
appears
carry
to
on
be
discussing
19 seconds. Monet said that Europe responds best in a crisis, or it's the sum of all the collective responses that lead to that response. I just don't think we recognize the crisis. And there are plenty of historical examples of countries, states coming together in alliances to overcome autocracies, to overcome dictatorships. But it's so much better to prevent it from happening in the first place. And that is what our focus should be on. And we know what needs to be done. We absolutely know what needs to be done. And funnily enough, it's not a shortage of capital. It's a shortage, as Dimitri Kuleba said, of will, and primarily will to strip back the regulation that is preventing Europe behaving collectively and consolidating. Because if we don't, history is not going to judge us well.
Thanks. Anything to add?
Yeah, I would like to add something, and I wanted to connect it with the previous discussion on the economy. Because at the end of the day, if the EU is to define its own strategic autonomy, that we all realize that it's the imperative for the future, we have to have the economy coming back. And it was good that we had that discussion before, because we need to be very concrete about how do you kind of bring back the Eurozone into force.
Thanks. We have to break. Tomi, if it's like 10 seconds, you got it. That's it.
I think it's very easy and very difficult. I think we have to go back to basics to build build our defense and build our economy. As we discussed yesterday, we have to go much more pro-market, pro-business. I think that was what we have been missing last 10 years or more.
Okay, lovely. Well, thanks very much to all our panelists.